Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Technical Gentleman. So, today's episode is going to be about web browsers. How do you pick one? How do you configure one? All that good stuff. So, last episode we talked about VPNs and the use of those, and their primary use, right, was to prevent your internet service provider from seeing what websites you're visiting and to prevent the websites you're visiting from seeing your IP address. But that's not the only way that people are able to track you. So one of the biggest vulnerabilities is obviously your web browser, right? That's the part of your computer that is connecting to the internet, and it is your first line of defense and your first weakness. Um, so there's kind of two ways that this web browser could be the web browser itself could be a problem. One is that the web browser itself could actually be tracking you. So depending on who's making your web browser and whether that web browser is proprietary or open source, that web browser it is entirely possible that that web browser is actually spying on you, is monitoring the websites you're visiting, and is sending that information off to whatever company that made that web browser. So most I would never trust any proprietary web browser made by any large corporation like Microsoft Edge or Safari or Google Chrome or any of that stuff. It's all made by massive big tech companies that make their money off of data mining people. Those web browsers are all proprietary. We already talked about what that means. There's no way to see what that web browser is actually doing in the background. Most of them aren't even trying to conceal the fact that they're sending information off to their parent companies. Most of them are pretty even transparent about that. And obviously, because they're proprietary, even if they have settings to disable any of that kind of telemetry stuff, you couldn't trust those settings because it's proprietary software. You can't see what the code is doing. You have no way of knowing what data that web browser is collecting. So our first criteria for picking a web browser is going to be, is it an open sourced web browser? The second kind of big area of vulnerability in a web browser is the websites that you're visiting. So we need to websites that you're visiting are installing. You probably heard the term cookies thrown around before. These are basically little tracker files that websites are installing onto your system so that they can track you. Some of them are perfectly benevolent. So for example, if you were to enable auto logins, you don't have to go and verify your device every time you log into a particular account. The reason that you can do that is because the website that you visited has installed a cookie on your system to let it know that, hey, this is a trusted device. So we don't have to send him a text every time he enters a new device. Yeah, if you ever try to log into an email on a new device and it makes you enter in a number that you got via text because it's a new device, the only way that it knows that is because of these kinds of tracker files. So some of them are perfectly benevolent. Others of them are not so benevolent. Others of them are tracking your data from website to website, and these websites can read these cookies and they can see what's going on. And so the kind of the second part of this is going to be configuring your web browser in such a way that we are blocking as much of this as we possibly can. The other important thing is going to be you ever, and actually I'm going to jump onto the desktop and I'm going to show you this. So give me just a second and I'm going to launch my my Windows VM, and I'm treating it like a fresh install. So this would be like you just installed Windows, and I'm going to walk you through how to do this and show you some of what I'm talking about. So see you in just one sec. Alrighty, so we are on now. This is not my actual desktop. This is just a Windows virtual machine that I've got running. So we can talk more about virtual machines at some point if you guys are interested. But suffice it to say, this is just like a pretend Windows install. This is just a fresh install. There's nothing too fancy on here. So I would recommend for just about everybody that you, as your web browser, you use Mozilla Firefox. The reason for that primarily is that Firefox is open source, at least for the most part. There's one exception to that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. It is open source. It is very full featured, so you're unlikely to run into websites that just don't work. Some of the more locked down web browsers are certainly more locked down out of the box than Firefox is, but they are going to break your stuff. So I would recommend, if you're looking for a full featured web browser, Firefox is excellent for that. It also has excellent support for all of the various extensions and stuff that we're going to put in here in order to help block out some of these trackers. So this is a fresh install of Firefox. I haven't done anything here to configure anything. So we're just going to jump into the settings, and I'm going to show you how to configure a fresh instance of Firefox so that you can secure your web browser. This, by the way, will work on any operating system. So if you're on Windows, if you're on Mac, if you're on Linux, you can follow these steps. It should all be about the same. This will work on your Android device. You can download full-fat Firefox on your Android device and do all the same stuff on there. The one thing that this will not work on is Apple phones. As far as I'm aware, there's no full-fat version of Firefox for Apple phones. There is a version of Firefox, I think it's called Firefox Focus, that's pretty good. There's also another mobile web browser called, it's the DuckDuckGo web browser. I think that's what it's called. And that's very good as well. But I'm not really targeting these videos for Apple people, because if you're on Apple, you're beyond my saving. So so this will work on everything else though. So you're gonna go up here. You got your 3-bar menu up here. You're gonna go down to your settings. Click on that, and this is your whole shebang here. This is your settings. In the general tab here, you're gonna want to scroll down. Right here it says digital rights management, or DRM content. This is that one part of Firefox that I was saying was not actually open source. This is the one little proprietary chunk that is in Firefox. If you want to do anything related to streaming of content, so you want to access Netflix or Hulu or any of that good stuff, you need this enabled. This is primarily used for protection of copywriting, and making sure that you're not, pirating stuff off of Netflix. So if you want to do any of that, you need to have this checked. If you're worried about that one little proprietary chunk, you can always come in here and uncheck it. I usually just leave this checked for most people. I'm not that worried about that one little tiny proprietary blob in here. Some of the purists may be angry at me, but there you go. Your home setting, you can change this or not. This isn't going to have any real impact on your privacy. I usually just leave it as blank. I don't like having like home pages or anything like that. Search settings, this is going to be really important. So you're probably used to using Google as a search engine. Don't use Google. For the love of God, do not use Google. DuckDuckGo. Use DuckDuckGo. It is very full-featured. You're not going to miss anything, but it respects your privacy. It's not tracking all of your search history. It's not doing any of that. It's just this DuckDuckGo is designed to be a privacy respecting search engine. So, if you can, it's going to be a regular search engine. It might take you a week or so to get adjusted to it if you're used to Google, but it's just a search engine. It looks a lot like Google does. I think it looks better than Google, frankly. And it's a privacy respecting search engine. So put this on everything. Doesn't matter what web browser you're using. Use DuckDuckGo. Don't use Google. So that's the first thing. Privacy and security settings. I usually set this to strict. It says it can break some websites. I usually don't care too much about this. This is just going to kind of block some stuff by default. That's useful, I think. Turn this on to always, the send websites that do not track signal. Turn this on to always. Websites generally don't respect this, but you can check it on anyway. This basically just is... It's kind of silly. It's like you visit a website and you send them a little message saying, please do not track me, and then you just hope that they follow it. So it's kind of silly, but I do it anyway, just for kick's sake. But don't rely on that by any means. This is stuff you can all pretty much leave as default. You could disable your passwords through Firefox. That's probably pretty good practice. I'm going to talk about password management in a future video, but it couldn't hurt you to disable this unless you really, really need it. So I'll just go ahead and disable that for kick's sakes. Same thing with the autofill. I generally don't like this. I don't like having that stored in the web browser. The web browser is like the first point of attack. So keep in mind that if you're storing data in your web browser, you're opening it up to potential attack. It's probably fine, but I generally just disable it for safety's sake. Obviously, you could disable history if you really wanted to. I don't know, there's a bunch of good reason to do that, other than just make a hassle for yourself. Location settings. I generally tell them to block new requests by default. That's probably good practice to do that. Okay, this one's really important. So this is Firefox's telemetry stuff. So Firefox, just like all of the other big tech companies out there, collects telemetry on its users. However, there's a setting in here to disable the telemetry features. Because Firefox is open source, you can actually trust with 100% certainty that when I check these off, I am actually checking them off. I'm actually disabling telemetry in Firefox. So that is the wonder and joy of open source software. So do that, check that off. Do not forget to check that off. That's going to be it for the main settings. After you've done this, you're going to go down here to where it says extensions and themes. You're going to click on that. And the first thing you're going to go up here to the search bar, and you're going to type in HTTPS, and just go ahead and search for that. It'll come up first thing here. Okay, so this one, HTTPS everywhere. Click on that. So if you ever notice up here in the little search engine here, or the little bar here, we enter in the website domain, that websites are always preceded by either HTTP or HTTPS. HTTPS is it's basically a form of encryption. What that is doing is that is encrypting the traffic between your web browser and the site that you're visiting. So let's say you didn't have a VPN enabled and you wanted to connect to google.com. Google is encrypted using HTTPS. So if you were to search something on Google, your VPN, because they're going to need to see the IP, or your ISP, sorry, your internet service provider, because they need to see the IP address of the site that you're visiting, they're going to know what site you're visiting. But with this encryption, they won't be able to see anything kind of past this point. So anything that you're actually doing on that website, so let's say you wanted to do a Google search, or I'm going to try to emphasize now, we're using DuckDuckGo, not using Google anymore. So let's say you wanted to search something using DuckDuckGo. Your internet service provider, without the VPN, would be able to see that you are accessing DuckDuckGo. But because HTTPS is enabled, they're not going to be able to see what I'm searching. So if I wanted to search for, I don't know, I want to search for Linux. Search for Linux. This is the operating system that I'm actually using on my host computer here. If I wanted to search for Linux, my internet service provider could see that I am accessing DuckDuckGo, but they couldn't see that I was searching for Linux because of this HTTPS encryption. So this is very, very useful. Even now, I'm using a VPN, obviously, so my internet service provider can't see that. But even my VPN could see that I'm connecting to DuckDuckGo, but because of that encryption, they couldn't see that what I was searching on there. So this is an excellent extra layer of security. Obviously, the site can still see what you're doing, but it's an excellent little extra layer of computer, and you think a lot for like banking stuff. Like, this is really important. The reason for this add-on, let's say you had gone up here and you clicked a link, and it was just HTTP. A lot of sites will allow, even if they have HTTPS as an option, they will still allow you to connect to that website without HTTPS enabled. So if you were to click on a link that didn't have the HTTPS in there, just had HTTP, you would probably be able to connect to that website. You just wouldn't have the encryption. What this add-on is doing is just go ahead and click add to that, click add, and click OK here. What this add-on is doing is it is automatically redirecting anytime that you connect to a website where HTTPS is enabled. It is automatically directing you to that version of the site. So you never have to worry about accidentally clicking on a link or typing in a URL without that enabled where it could be enabled and ending up at a non-encrypted version of the site. So useful tool to have on there. The next one I'm going to recommend is Privacy Badger. Go ahead and click on that, add that to Firefox. What this is doing is, as you're accessing different websites, it's keeping track of any potential trackers. These are these kinds of cookies that are on there. It's basically monitoring for any of these potential cookies, and it is blocking any ones that it sees kind of that it thinks are a tracker, that it could be monitoring that. So that's a useful little tool to have going in the background. The other one that I really recommend is this uBlock Origin. The other major vulnerability of most web browsers is JavaScript. The internet relies very heavily on JavaScript, and it's basically a coding language that allows for it allows for a lot of different fancy things that the websites are capable of doing that it might not be able to do otherwise. And a lot of websites rely on JavaScript in order to work properly. So you can't really just disable it wholesale. But JavaScript can be pretty harmful if it's left unchecked. There's a lot of vulnerabilities in JavaScript and in some of the scripts that are running on sites. And those will include things that could track you. It will include things that are actually malicious, that could be installing things like malware on your system. Include certain like ad stuff. What this is doing basically is it's got a filter list on here. I'm not going to recommend you change any of these settings in stage 1. I'd recommend you just leave this all basic. It is unlikely to break anything important. And basically what this is doing is it's saying it's a blacklist of known harmful JavaScript that could be running in the background. So if you're accessing a particular website and it sees that there's something that it knows for a fact is a malicious script, it will automatically block that for you. So I could try, and it does whitelists like sites that you might not want to have stuff blocked. So if I were to go over to YouTube, we could just see. I don't know if it'll block anything on here. Show more data, so you can see some of what it's. So it's allowing scripts, or at least most of the scripts from Google, from YouTube. But there's also some of these other little scripts running in the background that are probably like ad stuff or tracker stuff that it's blocking by default. So you just leave that running. So I would recommend that you would go through and install those three things in particular, those 3 add-ons in particular. You just leave them running there. You're unlikely to run into any serious issues. Every now and then, you might need to, for a particular site, go in here and just disable this. All you have to do is click the big power button to disable it. If it's blocking something that it shouldn't be blocking, that maybe you need for that website to run. But generally speaking, you should be pretty comfortable with these settings as the defaults. So that's that's how you would configure a web browser for everyday use. This is pretty good, reasonable level 1 web browser configuration. This is how I've configured my parents' web browser on their computer. So you should be pretty safe with this. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be coming out with some more tutorials real soon here. So we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye bye.